Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to explain a little what happened, why we went from in-person to virtual. So it was an unexpected situation that arose. There was a communication that a third person emailed the author. And we thought from the communication, we thought it would be of the best interest for everybody to not meet in person, but to meet virtually. So I'm sorry for the little chaos that's gone on and all the stuff that we had to email everybody and call everybody, but I hope this works better. So as you all know, I should have introduced myself. My name is Carol Stern. I'm a librarian here at the Glen Cove Public Library, and we do these author talks almost every month. The next author that I'm getting before we start this one is Ellen Baker, and she wrote The Hidden Life of Cecilia Larson, and she will be here by Zoom Tuesday, July 22nd at 2 p.m. That's July 22nd at 2 p.m. You can sign up on our webpage. So now it's truly an honor to have Marjan Kamali here with us. She's the award-winning author of The Lion Women of Tehran. It's an instant bestseller. The Stationery Shop, a national and international bestseller, and Together Tea, which was a Massachusetts Book Award finalist. Her novels has been translated into more than 30 languages, and she's a recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California in Berkeley, an MBA from Columbia University, and an MFA in creating writing from New York University. Her essays have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Library Hub, Los Angeles Review of Books, etc. She's born in Turkey to Iranian parents. She spent most of her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the US. And now she lives in the Boston area with her family. So The Lion Woman is a powerful, decade-spanning novel about a childhood friendship that endures into adulthood. It explores the broad meaning of feminism and how two very different women living very different lives make unique choices, each becoming a lion woman in their own right. The story is rich with love, friendship, heartbreak, and history, immersing readers in the Iranian Revolution alongside Ellie and Homa. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate your flexibility. I wish I could have been with all of you in person, but this is the next best thing. So I'm happy to be able to still join you and to have our conversation.
So on this topic, given the headlines involving Iran today in recent months, many of us come to this novel with heightening awareness and emotion. At the same time, your book is rooted in a different era and a deeply personal lens. So all being said about that, I just wanted to ask you questions, and I'll start off by asking, why did you want to become an author, and when did you know you first wanted to write a book?
Yeah, it's funny because it's all coming full circle today as we sit here in these really, really fraught times with what's happening with Iran and with Israel and just the conflict escalating, sadly. I wanted to be a writer ever since I felt that reading helped save me. And I was always a bookworm. So when I was a kid, ever since I learned to read, I found a great deal of just pleasure in the act of reading. And it became my go-to pastime. And sometimes when I give my book talks, I show slides. And in most of my pictures from my childhood, I'm either reading or holding a book. So I was never far away from a book. And then during a very difficult time in my childhood, and that's how we come sort of full circle in a very eerie way. I am a child of war. So I was a child during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. And during that time in the basement, one thing I did to help sort of dissociate from the very difficult realities of the experience was to read. This is before we had the internet. We couldn't scroll or anything. And I was very much in awe of the power that authors had to just take us to a different time and a different place by stringing together these words. And I know back then the seed was planted. And I remember thinking one day I would love to have this superpower to give to other people what these authors have given me, which is a balm, a comfort, an understanding, a deepening of my empathy, and sometimes just an adventure transporting me to a different time and a different place. And one thing that sets, I think, fiction apart from other things that transport us is fiction is very interactive. So we can sit in front of a TV show and sort of veg out and chill, and nothing wrong with that. But when you're reading a novel, you're interacting with the writer in a way that feels very immersive, and you're always trying to guess what's going to happen next and sort of walking in the shoes of the characters. And I loved that experience, and I wanted to be able to give it to others. But it didn't come so easily. It took me a very long time to pursue this path.
So what was the inspiration for this story? Like, how did you come up with this one?
Well, this is my third book, so some of the people joining us might know that my second book, The Stationery Shop, came out in 2019. And that book sort of changed my career. It became a bestseller, and it really gained a lot of readers during the time of the pandemic. And I think that's no accident. I think people felt like they wanted to escape to a different time and a different place and sort of immerse themselves in this experience. And I started to write the next book after The Stationery Shop, and it was about these four mothers who get together um, in a cafe, Miss Ellie's Cafe, and they're discussing the trials and tribulations of having their firstborns apply to colleges. And they live in suburbia, and they're deeply competitive with one another. And they all want their firstborns to go off to Ivy Leagues. And, I didn't really have to use my imagination. It's a very common refrain in towns like the one in which I live. And I had written more than 100 pages. But then when the lockdown started, I was in that period of uncertainty that all of us were in. And I remember scrolling Instagram and seeing these posts from a friend of mine. And she had been my childhood friend when I lived in Iran. And I just sat there. When I saw her face again, when I saw her posts again, I was flooded with memories, memories of that childhood friendship, of this connection we had that was so strong and felt unbreakable. And yet, decades later, we lived in entirely different planets. I was a writer telling stories, and she still lives in Iran. She works for a human rights organization. But I really felt the impact of that friendship when I kind of saw her face again. And I really think that the influence of these early friendships lasts, even if the friendship itself ends. And that's when I knew I really wanted to write a book about friendship, but I had to make a really difficult choice, which is to set aside the other book I was writing. But I ultimately did do that, and I started the Lion Women of Tehran.
So you said you had met four women in a restaurant. I didn't mark it in the book, but somewhere in the book you wrote that you had originally had four characters and then you went to two characters. Was that in your author's note?
That was in the author's note. In the author's note at the back of the Lion Women of Tehran, I say I was writing that other book. The four women were the four mothers that, were in that book that doesn't yet exist anymore. And they would hang out in a cafe, which was Miss Ellie's Cafe. So I plucked out Miss Ellie and I made her one of the two heroines. So she's one of the two friends.
So did you give this to your editor and they edited it and said, don't do this, or you decided that on your own?
Oh, I decided it on my own. I mean, my agent knew because she had read the 100+ pages of the other book.
Yeah.
That's what I had sort of pitched as the book I was writing. But I felt so strongly when it's like sometimes the universe almost tells you what to do. And I felt so strongly that I wanted to write about Ellie and make it her story and her friendship that, she was on board with me taking the leap and switching.
So are any of the characters based on your life?
That's a great question. I made them up. So I made up Ellie, I made up Homa, I made up Ellie's mother, I made up the husbands. But look, ultimately, of course, you borrow from your own life. And even though I'm not Ellie and she's not Homa or vice versa, the truth of the emotional dynamics of the friendship are, of course, somewhat from my own experience, because sometimes we make up the characters as writers and we make up the setting and the circumstance, but I think the emotions are true. The emotions are real. And sometimes I get asked about Ellie's husband, who's just this great guy, and we kind of keep waiting for him to turn into a monster, and he doesn't. And I'll just tell you and the ladies of the Glen Cove Library book group meeting today that he is based a bit on my own husband. Some of the things he says, like I borrowed a bit from my husband's repertoire, but he's not my husband per se. So it's like you borrow bits and pieces. And I made the two friends born the year my mom was born, even though they're not my mom. But they go to the same high school she went to. All the details about the high school are real.
So what part was about your husband that is true?
Well, Ellie's husband is very sort of rational and even-keeled. He doesn't get too emotional, unlike Ellie's mother, and he doesn't sort of, um, well, he's nothing but supportive of her, right? I mean, he's incredibly supportive, and those parts I'm happy to say are real. So I based also his disdain for superstition on my husband. He's a scientist like my husband. There's this very, very strong running vein of superstitious belief, especially in the evil eye, in so many cultures, including the Persian culture. And um, I borrowed some of the lines my husband has said regarding the evil eye, like how it's just, in his opinion, this ridiculous sort of thing we've all made up. But who
Oh, your
knows?
husband sounds like a nice guy.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. Yeah,
So
he's
you lived in Tehran for a while. Can you talk about your childhood there and what it was like?
Yeah, so I lived in Tehran not for very long in my whole life, even though I write about it so much. I lived there between ages 2 and 5. So between ages 2 and 5 was before the revolution. It was during the Shah's time. It was a very different country. And then after the revolution, right after, my family actually returned. And some people might remember that when the revolution happened, everybody thought it would be this great thing because the dictator was gone, they would have democracy. But, well, now we see that it turned into a right-wing theocracy that is awful. But we didn't know that at the time, and it hadn't quite gotten there yet. So when I lived there, right after the revolution, the war began. And therefore, the time I was there, that year and a half when I was 9 and 10, was very much a pivotal time for Iran's history because they kept changing the laws and making the country more and more fundamentalist, and the war started. So I was there for those two incredibly formative situations for both the country and for my life. You know, it really, really shaped me.
So how did you incorporate the history of Iran with your book, and how did you do your research?
Yeah, there's so much history that I didn't know, and I was well aware that I didn't know, which is why I almost deliberately set myself up for this challenge of writing about mid-20th century Iran because it would force me to learn. So, for example, in the stationery shop, I write about the 1950s and particularly the 1953 coup d'etat, and that's the background of that love story. It forced me to learn. And in the Lion Women of Tehran, we have several decades that form the background, and it's the women's rights movement. And I deliberately set the story over the course of several decades so that the reader could see the arc, so they could see how in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, Iranian women gained all these rights. And then after the 1979 revolution, when the new government took over, those rights were taken away. Those rights were taken away beyond anybody's imagination. So my research, obviously, I read a lot. I read nonfiction books. I read some fiction books. I researched online, but there was really nothing as valuable as interviewing people who had lived there at that time. And I was in a position of privilege because I had access to these people that I could interview, namely my own mother. So I bothered her endlessly with so many questions. And, things like what happened historically on a certain day, that you can find out. You can research online or what have you. But I asked her things like, what did you have for lunch when you were in high school? Like, how did that work? Did you go to a cafeteria? Did you bring lunch from home? Did you go to this? Well, we found out she went to Cafe Andre, which is a real cafe and very popular and plays a big role in the book. So those details, those day-to-day details of what people were wearing and what they were eating and the music they listened to and the films they saw, all of those were really wonderful for me to learn about. And those I learned mostly from interviewing people.
So what is fiction in the book versus what is fact? I mean, you have you talk a lot about food, so I guess that's.
Well, the food is certainly fact. Every dish I mention in the book is one I make regularly, and the characters enjoy the foods I enjoy, so all of that is fact. The historical events I write about are fact. So even though this is a book of fiction, I can't make up any historical event. So when I write about, for example, the march on Women's Day in March 1979, when thousands and thousands of Iranian women marched in the streets because they were worried that their rights would be taken away, all of that is fact, down to the minute, down to the day. When I say that some men attacked them, called them prostitutes, called them garbage, that's fact. When I say that other men formed a human chain around them in solidarity and to protect them, that's fact. And all of those pictures you can see online. So all the historical events are fact. The political events are fact. The friendship is fiction. The relationships, the characters I made up, but we know the emotional dynamics are usually from some truth. So, yeah, I would say I made up these characters, but they're very real to me. And the circumstances under which they live, politically and historically, are fact.
I have to say this was one of the best books I've read, and I grew up during this time, but it just reading this book just opened my eyes to what happened during that time that, yeah, I guess I didn't pay that much attention to, and your book really brought it to light, and it was very well done, my
Thank you.
opinion.
Thank you so much. And I later learned, Carol, that you and I went to the same junior high school,
Yes,
which I am not too far from where I'm sitting. Yes.
it's a small world, right?
Yes, it's a small world.
So you talked about the evil eye with your husband. Ellie's mother had an obsession with the evil eye. How did you get it? Can you talk about how you wrote about all that and how you got her involved in that?
Yeah, well, those of you who've read the book, you know that Ellie's mother is a grade A narcissist. And this should go without saying, but I know my mother would like me to let you know that that is not my mother. So she is not my mother. But I did do a lot of research on narcissists, and there are other narcissists I know. And so I tried to make her this piece of work, this narcissist, but I needed for her to get into Ellie's head and to sort of affect how Ellie views herself and affect how Ellie just is almost riddled with jealousy and with insecurity. And one reason that Ellie is jealous and insecure, you could argue maybe it's part of her nature. It is. But her mom doesn't help. She doesn't help with all this nonsense about the evil eye, where, if Ellie is feeling fine about something, like, for example, her friendship with Homa, and she's enjoying Homa, and she's happy that she has this great thing in her life, and then her mom will sort of swoop in and plant the seed of doubt in Ellie's brain and say, well, don't jinx it. Homa's going to jinx it. the evil eye's out to get you. You're going to be suffering because you're so happy, so the other shoe's going to fall. I needed that as a theme in the book and as a thread in the book because that too is real, culturally, very real. And also for the character, for the purposes of the novel, I wanted Ellie to be riddled with doubt. And the number one person who can get into our head is, I think, a parent. That's what I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Ellie was also jealous of Homer, which was another theme that ran through the book, I thought. Can you talk about the jealousy between the characters at all?
Yes. So
Between their classes, politics.
they're very different, aren't they? I mean, Homa comes from a much less privileged background. Her family's poor, and Ellie's family was rich and then experiences some financial difficulties, but becomes rich again. And they come from different social classes altogether. And we know Homa is brave. Homa is idealistic. She's an activist basically her entire life. She has this strong sense of justice and she has a strong moral compass. And Ellie, well, she's insecure. I mentioned she's jealous. She's worried about the evil eye. She's, it's, it's sort of easy to say she's jealous of Homa because Homa is so brave and she has these character traits that Ellie doesn't have. True. But I think deep down, what she's jealous of the most is Homa's family. She's jealous of Homa's mother because Homa has this great mother. Homa has a mother who does nothing but be kind to her children and sort of build them up, which we know is not Ellie's mom. And she's also jealous of Homa's father because she has a father, A, and he's very supportive and wonderful. And Ellie's jealous that Homa has siblings and she doesn't. So I think deep down, she's jealous of the only thing money can't buy, which is a good family. Yeah.
That's true. And I think their friendship was very nice too. Like it's a childhood friendship. Like there is nothing like a childhood friendship in life that you meet somebody when they're young and that stays with you throughout your whole life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even if you're not friends anymore, right? Like even if you lose touch, they stay with you throughout your whole life. Now, if you can remain connected, even better. That's a bond that is so valuable. But even those of us who don't stay in touch necessarily with our very, special childhood friends, I think they still help shape who we are.
So when you were in Iran when you were young, did you meet anybody that you have kept in touch with to date? Do you speak with anyone?
You mean friendship wise? I mean, obviously my relatives, I do.
Yeah, I meant friendship wise, yeah.
Yeah, friendship wise, here's the thing. I'm connected now with some of them on social media because we found each other again. And that's a blessing and a curse because on the one hand, you're connected. So it gives you this facade of we're connected. But are you really? I mean, we don't really have deep talks. So, we don't talk in person or on the phone even. We are Facebook friends. We're Instagram followers. So yeah, a couple of them I am social media friends with.
Yeah, I guess social media changed the world with this. I mean, people can stay in touch much better.
Yeah, yeah.
So can we talk about the title, The Lion Women of Tehran?
Mhm.
I think it's a very evocative title. Can you tell us where it came from and what it means to you and how you picked it?
Well, guess what? I didn't pick it. I'm gonna be honest with you. It wasn't my title. Originally, I had a different title, which was a terrible title now that I look back. And I was a little unwary. I was worried about this title. I thought, oh, is this a good title? I pushed back a bit. It was my editor who picked it. God bless my editor. Um, and at first I resisted and resisted, but now I can't imagine it being called anything else. And now I'm really proud of the title, to be honest with you. Um, so the Lion Women, so the phrase Lion Women, it means these women, it's literally translated from the Persian Shirzan, Lion Women. And that's a phrase I heard my entire life. And it's always used to connote women who are strong, who are free, free of spirit, if not in reality, because sadly, so many times in real life, they're not free the way we think of freedom, but who are just brave and filled with integrity, and they're maybe opinionated and vocal. And these are the women that I grew up with. These are the women in my family. So, yeah, and we see how Homa first brings up the phrase to Ellie when they're very little. She says, we'll grow up to become lion women.
Right. And I guess there are all different types of lion women in life. There's the strong ones, and then who believe in justice, like Homer, and then there's those children who take care of their children. So there's a diversity in the difference of how you can interpret it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's really easy to think of lion women as the woman who's an activist, the woman who's marching on the streets, the woman with her fist in the air, the woman who's fighting for justice. That's a lion woman, that's for sure. But I also think that it takes so much bravery to live an ordinary life. That's not easy either. The sacrifices the moms make. Ellie ultimately leads a very non-activisty life. She's not on the streets ever, but that requires its own bravery. The one who raises the kids, the one who's home, the one who holds down the fort for reasons of desire or circumstance. So those two are the lion women. Yeah.
So what was your original title? What did you have in mind?
You know, it's funny because I was looking in my laptop, there were many titles. I think I had landed on When We Owned the World, or When the World Was Ours. And the fact that I'm mixing it up shows you why it was a bad title, because it's like too wordy and what have you. Yeah.
So
So
what's your writing process? How do you write? Do you outline? Do you know the whole story before you begin, or
so I am not a plotter. I don't usually plot ahead of time. So for the Lion Women of Tehran, here's what I knew. I knew I was going to write about friendship. That I knew. I knew I was going to write about a broken friendship. And I definitely wanted to write about forgiveness. So before I started, I was like, okay, there's going to be a big forgiving scene. But I didn't know what would be forgiven, and I didn't know how it would come about. And it was only as I started to write with my fingers on the keyboard, with the pen all across the page, because I do a lot of it longhand too, And as I wrote, then the story kind of developed. And I realized, okay, there's going to be a betrayal, and then there's going to be my lovely forgiveness desire. So I didn't know very much. I didn't plot too much ahead of time.
was it hard getting your first book published?
Yes, ma'am, it was. Yes, yes, yes. So hard.
And how long did that, how long did that, how did that all happen?
So I started writing my first novel. I think in my bio you mentioned I have an MBA, and that's a whole other story that we can talk about another day. I went to business school because by then we had ruled out med school, law school. I was never going to be an engineer. But I think there was this pressure for me to get like a professional degree. And so I went to business school. I started writing Together Team, my first novel, in the back of my business school lecture hall. And between when I wrote the first sentence to when it was, for example, in your library, it was a total of 13 years. Now, granted, I took off 7 or 8 years because I had kids and I stopped for a while. But it was always with me. It was always with me. So that first book took a very long time to write. And then once I got an agent, then it got published quite quickly, actually. But it took a long time for me to finish it.
And how do you find an agent? How did you go about doing that?
So, I was finding my agent before there was the whole internet situation the way it is now. I mean, now it's so easy. How do I find an agent? Put it in Google. Back then, we would go to the library and we would get a book called Literary and Publishers Marketplace or something, and we would look up agents. And you could find how do you find the agent that's right for you? Well, I was told when you read a book you love and it feels like your book, like in the genre of your book or in the tone of your book, read the acknowledgement section and see who they thank in the back of the book. And so I did that. I was like, oh, who did this person thank? Who did that person thank? Oh, that's an agent. And then you start to query the agents. And you have to, querying means you write a letter. This part is still the same, except now you submit it online, but it's a cover letter. And in that cover letter, you say who you are, what your book is about, and why you think this book is going to be just fantastic. And so, that's how you pitch your book. For fiction, you need to find your agent once you've finished writing the book. Not like you can't say, oh, I have this great idea, represent me. That's not how it works. You have to have finished it.
Are you working on anything next? Do you have another book you're working on?
Yes, I do. I do. The next book. So The Lion Women of Tehran came out. It's coming up on a year in about 2 weeks. Actually, I do believe in exactly 2 weeks. It will be almost exactly 2 weeks. It'll be 1 year since it came out. And then I'm working on the next story, which every time I finish one of my books, and all 3 of my books have taken place over decades and into 2 countries, always, the United States and Iran. And every time I start a new book, I say, this time I'm going to have a book that takes place like in a week or a day. I'm so tired of covering decades and doing all this research. And then I say, this time, like, I'm just going to stay like in one room. It's just it. But yeah, so the new book is going to be decades, and 3 countries now. I just
About?
can't help myself. Um, well, I hope I have not, I haven't actually written as much. This time I've carried so much in my head, but it's going to be a father-daughter story.
So you write only historical fiction? Is that that's what you like to do, or would you ever go into a different genre?
No, I would go into a different genre. I really would. Right now, I'm very happy to be writing historical fiction because it's that great quote that E.L. Doctorow said. He was actually my writing professor when I was getting my Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. And he wrote Ragtime, and he wrote historical fiction, amongst other things. And he always said, history books show you what happened, but historical fiction shows you how what happened made people feel. And I'm really interested in that. So yeah, right now I'm still very happy to write historical fiction, and I'm obsessed with kind of the mid to late 20th century. I like writing books when people didn't have cell phones. First of all, once they have cell phones, it takes away like 90% of your plot because, for example, in the stationery shop, in my second book, they can't find each other. They can't find each other where they're supposed to meet, and this leads to a huge misunderstanding and tons of ripple effects. Today, they would just be like, hey, where are you? They text each other, right?
You don't even have to say, "Hey, where are you?" You can track everybody.
Yes,
You
it's
don't
in
have to
their
even call
location.
them anymore.
Oh, you're over there. Oh, oops. Oh, okay. There goes my entire plot. So yeah, I love the 20th century though, for a variety of reasons. I think it's a very interesting century.
Well, historical fiction is my favorite genre to read also. You get the best of both worlds.
Yes, I totally agree.
So is
Yeah.
there any talk about making any of your books into a movie or a TV series or?
There is talk, and I've been sworn to secrecy. So I can't, Hollywood is a very strange animal. Like, you're not allowed to talk about anything ever. So I suppose I will stay true to that clause in the contract, but we'll see what
And
happens.
you're not even allowed to tell us which book it is that they are after.
Um, oh gosh, I think I can tell you that. Well, it's the stationery shop and Lion Women. Both are being considered. Considered, but that doesn't necessarily mean a thing. So let's see. Well, we'll see what happens. I'll come back and tell you when I know more, when I'm allowed to share.
Okay, okay, we won't push you.
Okay.
Can you give us a little more detail about the new book, about what it's about?
I can. I can. Okay, look, here's what happened. These things happen to me and they feel surreal, and then there's nothing I can do because I feel it's the universe speaking. So, the Lion Women of Tehran came out a while ago, as we mentioned, and then my dad passed away about 5, 6 weeks after. And we had to cancel some book events, obviously. And then we didn't reschedule all, but one we did. And when I went there, this woman came up to me in the book signing line and she kept telling me she had a gift for me. And she said it was this ancient page from a Persian poem. And long story short, I ended up meeting up with her. And when she showed me the page, it was in ancient calligraphy and it was 4 columns of black ink. And in the middle, in red ink, it said, "On this day, this character was born." It was a character's name, but that was my dad's name.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I was just so moved by that. The poem itself is thousands of pages long. The pages are scattered all over Europe, all over Asia, all over America, because these old editions exist, but they were ripped apart. But of all the pages in all the world, the page that came to me was the one with his name on it. So there's going to be a backdrop of this ancient poem in it. And that's all I'll say. I don't want to say too much because I truly haven't really written too much of it yet. So
Okay. But we look forward to it.
thank you. Thank
You
you.
too.
Yeah.
I'm sort of done with my questions. Do you think I left anything out that I should have asked you? And then there are questions in the chat I can ask, but is there anything that I left out that you want to say?
No, I want to talk more about Russell Sage, but we don't need to do that right now.
Are you on social media with that?
I'm on social media. Yeah, I'm on
Yeah,
Insta.
I'm on there. I'm on the, I follow that. So
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'll talk to you about it after, but let me look
Okay.
at let me look at the questions. If, I don't want to ask that. Is your husband American, or Iranian? Iranian.
He is both. He's like me. He's of Iranian heritage who didn't grow up there. So he grew up here. Yeah.
Please comment on Huma's mother becoming more religious after theocracy came in. Would she have been supportive of her daughter's activism?
Um, yeah. I mean, Homa's activism changes. When she's young, she's a communist, just like her father. Her father's a communist. And we sometimes forget, or maybe people never knew to begin with, there was a very strong communist movement in Iran, very strong. And Iran's borders, it bordered the ex-Soviet Union. So there was a concern on the part of America and the West that Iran would become a communist country. Uh, as for Homa's mother, she does become more religious later on. But I feel the character that she is, the person that she is, she would be supportive of her daughter's activism. It's so complicated. So many families were torn apart over politics, especially during and after 1979. But I tried to create Homa's mother as the kind of mother who loved her daughter unconditionally, which isn't how Ellie always feels about her own mom.
Linda Wegg asked the rape if Homa in jail and the child she bears, and eventually asked Ellie to take care of it. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, Homa, it's the child she bears is a result of a rape, and at that time, she wouldn't have been able to get an abortion, and she carries this child into the world, and I think the talk she has with herself is that the child is innocent, right? And that's what Abdul says too, and he's actually quite religious. This is God's child, which that's how they move forward. Ellie, we mentioned earlier, she's always been jealous of Homa's family and she's envied Homa's family, and then she feels somewhat guilty when she ends up with Homa's child. It's as though she almost willed it, and she has this guilt, which her husband, who's not superstitious, says, "Come on, give me a break. This isn't how this happened." Um, some readers I talk to say Homa almost gave Ellie the ultimate gift. It was the one thing she couldn't have. It was the one thing. She had all the privilege. She had money. She had status. She couldn't have a child. And in the end, Ellie ends up raising Homa's daughter. And, it's I I've also talked a lot about when Homa goes back to Iran. Did she intend to come back? She says she's going to come back. She says, "I'm going to go, I'm going to apply for my visa, I'm going to get my papers in order, and I'm going to come back." And then she gets arrested and never quite makes it back. So in a way, her friend ends up with her child.
Was that truth at the time? Like, was that really going on? And, I just read it as that's what was happening at the time, and it was so sad.
It was so sad. And it wasn't that uncommon because not everybody could leave. And some people couldn't leave, but their kids could leave. So they would have to choose between being with their child in an oppressive situation and a war, let's not forget the war, or having their child go outside the country, but away from them, but safe in
I
their.
didn't understand why she went back. Like, why didn't she just stay in the United States?
She didn't have, well, she only had like a visitor's visa, so she would have become illegal. So she went back to, Homa has a strong moral compass. She went back to apply. But then again, I don't know, subconsciously, somebody like Homa, would she really leave? Would she? I feel like there are women like her today in Iran, in the prisons, sadly, who have fought and fought and fought. Some people are really, they fight, because they feel if we all leave, then what's going to happen? So I think there was part of that too in her.
Right. Going on a little today too. Let me see more. What is the new book about? We said it. What is your connection? What, what is your connection to 1175 York Avenue? Was that an address or a random pick? And I'll tell you, I know the person who wrote that.
Oh, did you? I love that question. I've never been asked that. I love that. It's a real building. We know that, right? Does the person who know it's a real building? It's across the street from Rockefeller University. Here's my connection. So I'm not Ellie, we know that, and I'm not Homa. But Ellie's husband gets a job at the Rockefeller University, and they're housed in that building, which is Rockefeller University housing. When I was 22 and I graduated college, my first job was working at the Rockefeller University. So I gave myself a little cameo in the book. When Ellie and her husband go to meet Mehrdad's boss, the doctor, they go to and they see this beleaguered looking administrative assistant who's 22 with a ponytail. It looks miserable. That's me. So anyway, I used to work at Rockefeller, so that's why I put that in there. That was a little joke for myself. So I'm happy that you caught that.
Okay, I think I know the person who asked, but I don't know if he's on or not. He thought there was a connection with some of the people that you knew there, but I don't know if they're on the Zoom to talk at the end. Thank you for this wonderful depiction of women caught up in oppressive regimes. I was surprised Ellie was educated, but ended up working in the cosmetic department at Bloomingdale's in America. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think sometimes with certain classes, I think in Iran and in America, I think in many countries, as a woman, it's expected you get the degree, and you get the degree because you should get the degree. And then not everybody does something with it. But the expectation is still you should have it. You should have it in your back pocket. So I know Ellie, I feel like she grapples a bit throughout the book with her decision to stay at Bloomingdale's, and her mother definitely looks down on her, thinks it's beneath her, thinks it's uncouth. But yeah, she says I like it. Yeah, I know it's not, she's not a doctor or what have you, but she likes it.
It happens to a lot of people, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
you gotta do what makes you feel good. Can you say more about Ellie's mom's shift and later love for Ellie's uncle?
Mm. Yeah, I think, look, in the beginning, I was trying to signal that the uncle, once Ellie's father died, the uncle was more than happy to marry Ellie's mother. And that would have served a few purposes. He would have been able to take care of her financially. It wouldn't have been unheard of for a brother to marry his brother's widow, because that would be like, I'm taking care of you financially at a time when women didn't have agency or financial independence. But Ellie's mother resists. In her case, she resists and she doesn't want to do it. And then when Ellie and Homa play hooky and go off to the Grand Bazaar and they're running around and Ellie's mother finds out about it, she's mortified. And I think there's a part of her that thinks today it's this girl who she hates, Homa, and tomorrow it could be a boy in the alley and, God forbid. So she decides to accept the uncle's advances and to then get her ticket out of that neighborhood.
Um, how did you come up with the names for your main characters?
That's a great question. All the names are deeply intentional. So it's not that, I randomly name them that. Homa, the Homa bird, is an ancient Persian mythological bird. And as I say in the book, the myth is that it never quite lands. It's always in the sky and it's like on a different plane than the rest of us. And I feel that's who Homa is as a character, as a person. And then Eli is short for Elohe, which means goddess. And, Ellie's mother is obsessed with their superiority, like I'm descended from a queen and all of that. And then Abdul I picked on purpose because it's a more religious name, and I wanted him to have a religious name because it was a challenge for me to write a religious person in this way who's kind of a revolutionary but ends up doing the right thing. And then Mehdad, Mehr in Persian means goodness, kindness. So he's a good guy, right? We talked about how he's a good guy. And yeah, all the names are intentional. I spent so much time thinking about them.
That's so interesting. You
Mhm.
just taught me something new about your book.
Yeah.
What kind, talk about the kind of courage it took to ask Ellie to take care of her daughter.
So much courage, right? I mean, it's a sacrifice. She's sacrificing her time with her daughter, her mothering, her entire role. She's sacrificing it. I mean, she goes back to do the right thing to get her papers, but I also think subconsciously she goes back. She goes back to fight. And so, the woman who won the Nobel Prize for Peace a few years ago, Iranian woman, she's currently in an Iranian prison. She won it in prison. Her children are not with her. This is the price they pay for fighting and pushing back. But in every society, we have those people who fight on the front lines and who push back against autocracy. And it comes at a cost.
Yes. Are there any other Iranian writers that you admire and take inspiration from?
Well, the beauty is that, like when I was growing up, there weren't that many Iranian American. I'm assuming the questioner means, writing in English. But now, thankfully, there's so many great stories. There's a lot in a young adult world, right? So in the young adult world, There's a lot of queer Iranian American writers telling those stories because those are stories that have been completely, repressed historically. So there's Abdi Namazian, he's great. There's the writer who wrote Darius the Great is Not Okay, Adib Khorram, and there's Jasmine Darnick. There's so many, honestly, beautifully, happily. There's now more that I can recommend. And, one of the first books that came out that was so sort of iconic in that it told the story before other people were writing was the graphic novel Persepolis. Um, she shares my first name. And so that was like a big, big book that changed a lot of things. Yeah. Yeah.
So one more question. How is it that your family moved to so many countries? What happened? Why? And
Well, it was because my dad was a diplomat. So he was assigned under the Shah, he was assigned to a different country every few years. And so we had to move all the time. And then after I promised myself that when I grew up, I would marry someone who never moved because I was so tired of moving. And then, of course, I married someone who moved all the time. So I also moved a lot as an adult. But now I've stopped and I really hope to never move again. That's my goal in life. I hope. Yeah.
Edith Brown wrote, "It is wonderful to listen to you. I'm in awe that you are totally absorbed in writing a new book. And at the same time, you can revert back into the past book and make it so alive. You have a great brain. Do all your books become permanent parts of your DNA?"
Oh, that is a wonderful comment. Thank you, Edith. They do become a part of my brain and my heart and my soul. They become part of my DNA. It's a great way of putting it. You spend so much time with these characters as the writer, right? So, for example, Carol, when you read the book, you might finish it in a week or a few weeks or a day or a few hours. I spend years with them and I get to know them better than I know real people in my life. Truthfully, I know them better than some of the people in my life. So, yeah, they become part of my DNA, all the characters. And I noticed another question in the chat. Somebody mentioned that there's a hike in this book and there's a hike in my first book, Together Tea. And you know what? That's really interesting. I didn't do that intentionally. But the hikes both serve the same purpose of you connect with the person you're hiking with, and then there's like this perspective you get when you're at a higher altitude level. So yeah, interesting. Thank you for pointing that out.
So there's one more. Ellie feels that she was the reason Homer was arrested, which Homer says later she thought that maybe have been the case. Can you talk about the irony that Homer stayed in prison to protect Ellie?
Yes, yes. I wanted there to be that reveal towards the end because all along we know how guilty Ellie feels. She feels so guilty because inadvertently she creates this terrifically horrible situation for her friend. And then later she finds out that not only did she do that, but her friend, when pressed, under pressure, when her freedom was at stake, did not betray Ellie. And I really think a person like Homa wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. She would just, that's who she is. Like she, again, she's a person of such integrity. In that position, I don't know if I'd make the decision Homa made, but Homa does not give Ellie away, even though it means she stays in the prison. As writers, we love drama. So of course I was going to go for maximum drama.
But it was so well done. I mean, it just was so well done the way you did it. The book made you cry, laugh. It was so good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Someone wrote, "I love listening to you. I love the book, but hearing you is a bonus." I agree. I know you can't talk about a movie version, but if you were to cast a character, who would you like to choose?
Ooh, you know what? My late father, may he rest in peace, he always would say Meryl Streep. I would say, well, Meryl Streep, I don't know, because I think these days they want Iranian American actors. Like that's He said, if anyone can do it, it's Meryl Streep. So I don't doubt that, actually. I feel like she could pull it off. But yeah, there's so many great actors now in Hollywood and that also on the stage, you know, the Tonys just happened and there was this great Iranian play called English. And I saw it in person, lots of great actors on the stage. So we'll see. We'll see. We're nowhere near that just yet, to be honest with you. But I love the optimism in the chat.
We'll have to send Meryl Streep this.
Yeah,
We'll let her hear this.
know about this. Yes.
So we were doing a book signing. We were going to do it today, but unfortunately we couldn't. I'm so sorry.
Oh, me too. Me too.
I have books here if you if you want to purchase them. Reading your book made me closer to my own mother. Oh, I absolutely love your book and how relatable it is culturally.
Wonderful. That's lovely.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and for being flexible. And I loved this discussion. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. One day we'll meet in person for your next book.
I'll be back. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna make up for this. Yeah, I'll be back.
And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah,
Anybody they can unmute themselves if you want to say anything, but anybody wants to say anything?